I want to ask you something before we begin. Who is the hardest person in your life to love right now? Let that person come to mind for a moment. Now I want to ask you something else. When is it the last time you asked yourself the same question about yourself? Because every genuine mystic who has ever gone deep into the practice of love has found the same thing. The hardest person to love is not always the one you're thinking of. Sometimes it's the one looking back at you in the mirror. That's what we're going to explore today. Welcome to Ascend and Awaken. Most of us know immediately who it is: the family member whose choices we can't accept, the colleague who makes the workplace difficult, the person whose political views feel like a personal affront, the ex who left damage in their wake, the friend who betrayed a trust, the stranger online who seems to embody everything we find most troubling about the world. We call them difficult, we call them toxic, we call them impossible to deal with. And sometimes those descriptions are accurate. But the mystics, consistently across every tradition, point at something that makes us uncomfortable. The difficult person is also a teacher, not in the sense that their behavior is acceptable, not in the sense that you should stay in harmful situations or pretend that real damage isn't real, but in the precise sense that whoever triggers the strongest reaction in you is showing you something about yourself that you have not yet been able to deal with directly. Jesus said something that has been quoted so many times it has almost lost its power to shock. He said, "Love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you." Not tolerate your enemies, not manage your enemies from a safe distance. Love them. This is not a soft teaching. It is one of the most demanding and radical things anyone has ever said. And the mystics have spent 2,000 years trying to understand what it actually requires. Thich Nhat Hanh, the Vietnamese Buddhist monk, who has written and taught about love and compassion for decades, offered a practice he called looking deeply, not looking at the difficult person's behavior, not even looking at their words, looking at the conditions that produce them, their history, their own wounds, their own fear, the particular way that life has shaped them into the person standing in front of you. When you understand, he taught, you cannot help but love. This is not naive. It is not asking you to excuse harm or pretend that harmful behavior is acceptable. It is asking you to see past the behavior to the person carrying it and to recognize in that person something you know from your own interior life. Because here's what the mystics observe again and again: the person who irritates you most is often irritating you in precisely the place where you have not yet made peace with yourself. The person whose arrogance drives you to distraction, do you have arrogance you have not looked at? The person whose neediness exhausts you, do you have needs you are ashamed of? The person whose anger frightens you, do you have anger in you that you have suppressed? Thomas Merton saw this most clearly in his Louisville vision. Standing on that street corner, surrounded by strangers, he saw the secret beauty at the core of every person, what he called the person each one is in God's eyes. Not the behavior, not the wound, the person beneath it. And he realized that to love another human being genuinely past the surface is to learn to see what God sees, not what the ego has built up around a person, what is actually there. Here is where the teaching goes somewhere most spiritual books avoid. Henri Nouwen, the Dutch priest who wrote The Wounded Healer and spent his final years living alongside people with severe disabilities at a community in Canada, said something that stopped many of his readers in their tracks. He said, "The greatest trap in our life is not success, popularity, or power, but self rejection. Self rejection, not the difficult person out there, the voice in here, the one that says you are not enough, not worthy, not lovable as you actually are." Nguyen knew this from his own experience. He spent decades helping others find God's love while struggling privately to receive it himself. He wrote about it with an honesty that is rare and valuable. He said, "Nobody escapes being wounded. We are all wounded people, whether physically, emotionally, mentally, or spiritually. The main question is not how can we hide our wounds, but how can we put our woundedness in the service of others? When our wounds cease to be a source of shame and become a source of healing, we have become wounded healers. Wounded healers, not people who have solved their own problems, people who have learned to stop hiding from them, and in that stopping found something available to share with others. Wayne Dyer, the American author and spiritual teacher who spent his life pointing people toward their own inner worth, said it with striking directness. You can't give away what you don't have. If you don't have love for yourself, then you can't be loving to others. You cannot pour from an empty vessel. The love you are able to extend to the most difficult person in your life is directly proportional to the degree to which you have allowed love to reach the most rejected places inside yourself. Howard Thurman, the 20th century African American mystic and theologian, whose book, Jesus and the Disinherited, Martin Luther King Jr. carried with him everywhere, understood this at the deepest possible level. He wrote for people who had every human reason not to love those who stood against them, people with genuine enemies, real opposition, real harm done to them and to their communities. His answer was not sentimentality. He said, you can only love the person who has power over you or who has hurt you when you know at a level deeper than their opinion of you that your worth cannot be taken away by what anyone does to you. That dignity, rooted in your identity as a child of God, is the ground from which genuine love of the most difficult person becomes possible. Not weakness, not surrender. An interior freedom so complete that even the hardest person to love cannot shake its foundation. Rumi, the 13th century Sufi poet who understands the spiritual life as fundamentally a love story, pointed at both layers of this teaching with remarkable precision. On the barriers to love, he said, your task is not to seek for love, but merely to seek and find all the barriers within yourself that you have built against it. You are not looking for love out there. You are dismantling the walls you built in yourself that prevent you from feeling it and extending it. And on the wound that makes those walls, he said, the wound is the place where the light enters you, not in spite of the wound, through it. The places in you that feel most unworthy of love are precisely the places where, when you turn toward them rather than away, something opens. Not a wound that defines you, a door. The difficult person out there is showing you where the door is. They are pressing exactly on the place you have not yet been willing to look. Return for a moment to Jesus' commandment. Love your neighbor as yourself. Most people hear this and think it means love your neighbor the way you love yourself, assuming you already love yourself and projecting that love outward. But what if it means something else entirely? What if it means the quality of love you can extend to your neighbor is exactly equivalent to the quality of love you have for yourself? Not more, not less, exactly the same. In that reading, the commandment is both an instruction and a diagnostic. It is telling you that your capacity to love others is always a reflection of your interior relationship with yourself. When you find that you cannot love someone, genuinely cannot, the question is not only what is wrong with them, the question is also what is happening in me that is blocking this? And the answer almost always traces back to a place inside you that has not yet received enough love to give it away freely. So, what does this actually look like in an ordinary day? When the difficult person appears, and they will, you take a breath, a pause, the moment of space between the stimulus and the response. And in that breath, you ask two questions. The first is about them. What is this person carrying that I cannot see? The second is about you. Where is this landing in me? What is being touched that I have not made peace with? You don't need answers in that moment. Asking them is enough. The asking begins to shift something. Wayne Dyer put it simply. He said, you cannot be lonely if you like the person you're alone with. The degree to which you can be genuinely comfortable in your own company, genuinely at peace with who you actually are, wounds and all, is the degree to which you can be present with others without needing them to be different. That is the love the mystics are pointing at, not the love that requires the other person to change before it can be given. the love that is whole enough in itself to reach even the most difficult person without losing its ground. The teaching does not promise that the difficult person will become easier. They may not. What changes is you. The way you encounter them changes. The energy you bring changes. The question you are asking changes from how do I make this person different to what is this person teaching me about where I still need to go in myself? And over time, slowly, imperfectly, with many setbacks, something else shifts too. The self rejection Nouwen named as the greatest trap begins to loosen. The wound Rumi pointed at begins to let light in rather than block it. The interior dignity Thurman described, the ground that no one can take from you, becomes more solid. The love you are able to give to others and to yourself grows not by willpower, but by grace, by the gradual loosening of the grip that kept it locked away. Jesus said, love your neighbor as yourself. The mystics have spent 2,000 years discovering that those two loves are not separate, that learning to love the most difficult person out there and learning to love the most rejected part of yourself are, in the end, the same movement. Going inward far enough, and what you find is not the enemy you are afraid of. It is the love you were looking for all along. As I sit with this teaching, two things come to the forefront that I want to share. The first goes back to 1998, the year my previous marriage ended. Rather than run from what had happened, I made a decision to take a very hard look at myself. I had a lot of questions and very few answers, so I began working with a therapist, doing the kind of soul searching that is genuinely uncomfortable, coming face to face with things I hadn't realized I was doing, releasing anger and trauma I hadn't fully acknowledged was there. And over time, a couple of changes occurred that I didn't expect. The first was that I truly started to like myself, not fake it, not pretending, actually like who I was. I began letting go of what was no longer serving me, owning the parts of myself I genuinely loved, and perhaps most importantly, stopped worrying about what others thought and became comfortable in my own skin. The second happened when I wasn't looking. My lovely wife appeared as if out of nowhere, and I realized I was finally in a genuinely loving space to be in a healthy and loving relationship. We have had a wonderful 26 plus years together and counting. You cannot give what you don't have. That was Wayne Dyer's line. I lived it in both directions. The second thing is this channel. I could never have considered doing something like Ascend and Awaken from where I was in 1998. The fear, the self doubt, the voice that said nothing I had to offer was worth hearing. None of that would have allowed it. But as I continued to deepen my spiritual practice, truly begin to like who I am, and open up to allow life to unfold, to flow with the river rather than swim against it, life brought me here, to sharing these videos from my heart, and I wouldn't have it any other way. Today's invitation is this. Think of the person you found most difficult when I asked that question at the beginning. And then, just for today, ask yourself where that difficulty is landing inside you. Not to excuse them, not to abandon your boundaries, just to get honest about what is being touched. And then ask yourself one more question. Is there a place in you, a wound, a rejection, an old voice that needs the same love you are finding it so hard to give to them? Because the love that can reach the most difficult person is the same love that can reach the most rejected place inside yourself. They are the same love. Thank you for spending this time with me here on Ascend and Awaken. I'd love to hear from you. So, who in your life right now is the hardest person to love? And as you sit with that honestly, what might they be teaching you? If Ascend and Awaken supports your journey, consider subscribing for more reflections on spiritual awakening, inner peace, and timeless wisdom. Until next time, peace, love, and light to you on your spiritual journey.